Giant semi-bipedal predatory North American monkeys. Aquatic sea primates with fish-like tails. Gigantic long-bodied, armour-plated whales fringed along their sides with numerous flexible lateral fins. Bioluminescent, cave-dwelling, grave-robbing, long-tailed, crested, gigantic 21st century pterosaurs from New Guinea. Modern-day swamp-dwelling sauropod dinosaurs from the Congo. Bigfoot or Sasquatch. Loch Ness Monster. Cryptozoology, the study of animals known only from anecdotal evidence, provides, those of us interested in animals, real and imagined, with a vast wealth of peculiar, bizarre, sometimes ridiculous ideas. The general concept of cryptozoology is pretty logical. So anecdotal data is collected. Most typically this consists of eyewitness reports. It might also involve myths, legends, stories, artistic depictions of creatures, and so on. It's in some but not all cases it's concluded that an unknown creature is being described in these accounts, and conclusions are then made about its general identity. And those people who regard this given mystery creature, which is often termed a cryptid, people who regard this given mystery creature as possibly real, they then go about trying to collect additional anecdotal data for it, while at the same time hoping to actually demonstrate its existence to the satisfaction of the mainstream scientific community. Now, the process that I've just described is really well known. But what's less well known is that cryptozoologists have engaged in an enormous amount of speculation when it comes to the evolutionary history, the ecology and the biology of the mystery animals that they endorse. And let's now look at a few examples. The so-called father of cryptozoology is the late Belgian zoologist Bernard Heuvelmans. There are several different ways of pronouncing his surname, but today I'm going with Heuvelmans. There are various illustrations online that show Bernard Heuvelmans engaging in inappropriate close physical contact with a selection of hairy crypto hominids. Anyway, Heuvelmans promoted the existence of a gigantic, long-bodied, armour-plated sea creature. He termed this the conry. It's fringed along its sides with numerous laterally or dorsally projecting mobile finlets. And he created in quotes, created this creature, the conry, by combining a number of different eyewitness reports from the tropical oceans of the world with a second-hand, 40-year-old recollection about a weird carcass found on a beach in Vietnam in about 1883. That's the image you can see down at the bottom right there. But the whole saga becomes much stranger because Heuvelmans imagined this animal, the conry, as a whale. And not just as any old whale, but as a modern-day descendant of Basilosaurus. Basilosaurus is a very well-known marine predatory whale. It was a large, long-bodied animal. It's known from excellent fossils that have been found in what's now the southeastern United States, Egypt, Pakistan, a few other places. And it was alive during the late Eocene. That's around about 36 million years ago. In his 1968 book, In the Wake of the Sea Serpents, Heuvelmans concocted an evolutionary scenario in which Basilosaurus-type whales survived for about 40 million years longer than anyone thought, and contrary to what the fossil record indicates. At the same time, he proposed that they evolved this totally novel arrangement of lateral fin-like structures, while at the same time developing an extensive dorsal carapace formed from rectangular armour sheets. And Heuvelmans was actually confident enough in the existence of this creature to propose both common and scientific names for it. He wanted it called Allian's cetacean centipede, Cetioscolopendra alliani, because he believed that this was the same creature as a sea monster described by the Roman scholar Claudius Aelianus in the 1st century. Now, it would take time to properly evaluate the case for the conry's existence, but to summarise, if we look at the specific eyewitness report in question, well, it's very difficult to find any support whatsoever for Heuvelmans' identifications, for Heuvelmans' contention. His ideas do not seem to be at all likely or indeed reasonable. In fact, in some ways they look very ridiculous. We're never going to know what these things really are, but we can come up with a number of alternative explanations, and I would say that taking the idea that these sightings represent a modern-day, multi-finned, armour-plated Basilosaurus-type whale that survived from the Eocene, that is not the most likely, the most conservative interpretation, to say the least. And yet, these reports that I've mentioned, they represent the bedrock for the whole of the Conry's existence. So, basically, we are looking here at an exercise in speculative zoology. The Conry, this creature that Hooverman's imagined, it does not exist. It's a composite that he seems to have created, and any ideas about its evolutionary history, about its ancestry, are wholly speculative. Let's look at another example of this kind of thing. In another of his books, Hoovermans wrote about a fantastic African water monster termed the Dingo Neck. This is a dangerous, scaly predator, about 3 to 4 metres long. It has a short, superficially cat-like head. It has large, protruding teeth in its upper jaw. It's very dangerous, very aggressive. It leaps from the water to attack other animals, including white colonialist hunters. Hoovermans argued... Oh, sorry, I should say, there's what appears to be an ancient rock illustration of this thing from Brackfontein Ridge in South Africa. This image appears to show some kind of aquatic, superficially walrus-like monster. It's been suggested that this is an ancient depiction. Yeah, don't worry. It's been suggested this is an ancient depiction of the same creature, of the Dingo Neck. Now, Hoovermans took all of this stuff, together with a number of fables and tales about this creature, together with 1 or 2 eyewitness sightings from European hunters, and he suggested that the Dingo Neck is a modern-day aquatic saber-toothed cat. He proposed that there was an entirely novel lineage of aquatic saber-toothed cats that have survived to the present day. They haven't left any fossil record whatsoever. That always is a bit of an alarm bell, to say the least. They probably evolved aquatic habits in order to avoid competition with conical-toothed cats, leopards and lions and so on. During its evolution to aquatic life, this lineage of aquatic saber-toothed cats evolved a large flattened tail, which obviously forms their main propulsive organ, and at the same time, those big upper canine teeth came to be used in walrus-like fashion. And according to Hoovermans, the end result of this evolutionary lineage was basically a bunch of tropical African forest walruses, as brilliantly illustrated by John here. Now, as with the Conry, the entire scenario here really has to be regarded as a big house of cards, because the original accounts are nowhere near robust enough for us to take seriously the idea that there really is an actual undiscovered species, or more than one species, at the bottom of these reports. And as for Hoovermans' speculative evolutionary hypothesis, it's very interesting, it's very inventive, but it's not likely, it's not supported by any evidence whatsoever. And, if you want to be unkind about it, you could say it's basically nothing more than freewheeling speculation. And there are numerous other speculative evolutionary scenarios in the cryptozoological literature that do kind of similar things. They propose evolutionary scenarios for such things as the possible origins of mer beings, the possible evolutionary affinities of long-necked water monsters, the possible evolutionary position of crypto-hominids like Bigfoot, Yeti. The Loch Ness monster is not a hominid. Got to remember that fact.
We don't know that.
Sorry, we don't know that. Mystery hominids, including Bigfoot, the Yeti, and Orang Pendek. And this basically, the topic here brings us to our book, brings us to the Cryptozoologicon, Book 1. Hopefully there's a stack of them on the back of it. I can confirm that's correct. Those of you familiar with our previous book, or yesterday's, and also with the general stuff that we write about and illustrate, you'll know that we're big fans of speculative zoology. This is the imaginative field that involves the creation of hypothetical creatures from alternative timelines, from parallel worlds, from hypothetical evolutionary trajectories. Now, I'd say that speculative zoology is basically as old as it's very old. It's as old as fictional writing and art itself. I mean, you could say that people have been indulging in speculative zoology for as long as people have been recording their ideas. It goes back thousands of years. But in its modern form, modern guise, speculative zoology really took off in about 1981, thanks to Dougal Dixon's book, After Man, which I'm sure many of you are very familiar with. This was followed during the late 1980s by The New Dinosaurs, and more recently by Dougal Dixon's other books, Man After Man, Green World, which is only available in Japanese, and The Future is Wild. Elsewhere, the whole speculative zoology movement is kept alive online due to a number of projects, including the Speculative Dinosaur Project. Now, the content is still available online. I don't know if the project itself is still running, because most of the people involved in setting it up are now busy working scientists. Memo's Planet Snaid Project. I don't know if it's available online at the moment, but, well, it was good while it lasted, and let's hope it comes back one day.
Keep watching us. Keep watching us.
Keep watching. Furahan Biology and Allied Matters, a very active blog and website, excellent content on speculative zoology. And there is my own project, the Squamazoic, which is active when I can be bothered to update it. So these and other projects do keep speculative zoology very much alive, very active, certainly online. Now, to someone interested in speculative zoology, the cryptozoological literature has massive appeal. You know, if you're at all sceptical about cryptozoological claims and hypotheses, it's difficult not to interpret the ideas of the cryptozoological literature as exercises in speculative zoology. But whereas other speculative zoology projects are quite short-lived and in general only recently initiated, the fact that the speculative ideas of the cryptozoological literature have been running for decades means that numerous people have augmented, expanded, added depth and complexity to our ideas about the evolution, the biology, the ecology of Bigfoot, of the Loch Ness Monster, of sea serpents, and so on. So, inspired by all of this, John, Memo and myself, we decided to combine our interests in speculative zoology and cryptozoology, and to basically take a selection of mystery animals and imagine them as novel organisms that have evolutionary histories. So in other words, we wanted to play the same game that cryptozoologists have always have played. Now, there are places in the Cryptozoologicon where we have come up with entirely novel speculative ideas of our own, but there are others where we've been led by or been inspired by what already exists, the stuff that already exists in the cryptozoological literature. Let's look at one example. Let's talk about, why not, the bunyip. The bunyip is an Australian water monster, said to be quite scary, said to be very dangerous, said to have a terrifying voice. Now, if we want the bunyip to be a real animal, a real flesh and blood animal, and if we go with the shaggy-coated, long-eared, vaguely seal-like water dog version of the bunyip, the version that was particularly popular among white colonists of Australia, well, this animal clearly has to be some kind of aquatic predatory marsupial. And as soon as we start thinking along those lines, we are indulging in speculative zoology. So this is what we've done in the book. If bunyips are real, they have to be members of the marsupial clade Dasyuromorphia. This is the marsupial group that includes thylacines, Tasmanian devils, quolls and kin. How would a Dasyuromorph adapt to aquatic life, given the problems of keeping babies in pouches? How would a marsupial evolve paddle-like forelimbs, given the constraints associated with forelimb morphology in in the history of marsupial evolution? Well, you know, to get the answers to those questions, you will have to read the book. But suffice to say, it's not that difficult to come up with speculative scenarios that allow you to get round these possible evolutionary problems. I mean, yeah, we've even got a little cladogram that depicts the... so you know what we're talking about. A cladogram for bunyips. Now, the illustration that we have here featuring a live bunyip is a really nice, I think, a nice illustration of the fact that some of our illustrations are deliberate homages, deliberate references to things that are already in the literature. So John did this painting. This is a kind of cropped version. And I suggested it would be really neat if his version of the bunyip could in some way be reminiscent of an illustration of the bunyip that has great personal resonance. I really wanted his bunyip to be in some way reminiscent of the truly terrifying seal dog version of the bunyip from Richard Blythe's 1977 book, Fabulous Beasts, illustrated by Fiona French and Joanna Troughton. And I'm sure that those of you who know this book will appreciate how terrifying that vision of the bunyip is. Okay, so maybe it's just me. Okay. To give you a few other examples of some of the other sorts of speculative evolutionary scenarios that we have that we explore in the Cryptozoologicon, well, the chupacabra clearly has to be some kind of giant, semi-bipedal, nocturnal, vampiric opossum of some kind. Cadborosaurus, Tizarek, Megalotaria. Megalotaria is the long-necked sea monster of Bernard Hoovenwinter's books. These animals are clearly not Mesozoic grade marine reptiles. They are very obviously gigantic, morphologically novel pinnipeds, members of the seal, sea lion and walrus group. They are uniquely adapted for pelagic life. Gambo, the infamous beast of Bungalow Beach, is again obviously not a Cretaceous-style Mesozoic marine reptile that survives to the present day. That would be absurd. It is instead a giant, fully marine pelagic platypus, the only fully marine monotremes that we know of. Obviously, the beak tissue became sloughed off sometime prior to Owen Burnham's discovery of the carcass in 1983. The ahul, this is a giant child-sized predatory bat from Java, said to have a wingspan of 3 to 4 metres. It's obviously a member of the recently recognised, highly surprising bat-clade Pteropodiforms. This is a bat group that includes horseshoe bats and kin and fruit bats. And the Canvey Island monster clearly has to be some kind of giant bipedal marine frog closely akin to the froglets. The froglets from the children's television series The Clangers. Now, we've tried to make it clear in the book that we're not endorsing the specific identities that we propose, and anyone who reads our speculations and honestly thinks that we're being serious has obviously not been listening, nor have they read what's quite clearly stated in the book's introduction. But outside of the speculative parts of the book, we do evaluate the mystery creatures that we write about, that we include, that we illustrate, and our approach is definitely sceptical. We generally conclude that there isn't any good evidence supporting their existence. They almost certainly don't exist. I would say this is the case for, sadly, most of the cryptozoological superstars, Yeti, Loch Ness Monster, Bigfoot and so on. Now, a complaint that some cryptozoologists have made about people who are skeptics of cryptozoology, the complaint is that these people are naive, that they are cynical debunkers. If you Google debunker, you find that picture on the right. They are cynical debunkers who aren't really interested in the subject, that they're more interested in maintaining the status quo, in keeping the world as boring as possible. They're not really interested in actually properly evaluating the existence of mystery animals. So in other words, the notion is out there that the skeptics of cryptozoology are blinkered, biased, that they're essentially uninterested, that they are so-called scofftics. This is a new word that's evolved over the past couple of years. Now, I believe this is complete rubbish, and there are perhaps 4 arguments against this, although the arguments kind of overlap a little bit, and I'm not sure whether they're different arguments, but whatever. First of all, the first argument, most people who would label themselves skeptics have become skeptics because basically there isn't the evidence that satisfies their reasonable doubts. And I think that's perhaps the most important of these arguments. The second argument, the claim that skeptics kind of, aren't interested, that they're blinkered, biased, that they just really aren't interested in cryptozoology in the same way. I think this is highly arguable. I think absolutely wrong. Many people who label themselves skeptics are clearly absolutely interested, passionate about cryptozoology. They really want to get to the bottom of cryptozoological mysteries. It's just that they don't share the same faith or belief-driven confidence in the existence of certain mystery animals as do some cryptozoologists. Thirdly, I've said this before, I said this at the Zoological Society of London Cryptozoology meeting, and I've got to say it again now. The idea, and I've frequently encountered this within the cryptozoological community, the idea that skeptic is synonymous with uninterested hold on, I'm repeating myself. Oh, this is the same argument. Did I say that? Yeah. The thing that I've said before, and I'm going to say it now, is the idea that an interest in cryptozoology does not demand a literal belief in the actual existence of cryptids. And I say this because it's an important point that I want people to take away. You can be interested in cryptozoology. You can even call yourself a cryptozoologist. But this isn't because you're actually literally interested in the genuine flesh and blood existence of Bigfoot, the Loch Ness Monster, or whatever. But it's because you are interested in the associated socio-psychological phenomena that surround cryptozoology. So many people interested in cryptozoology, they don't really believe, as it were, in cryptids, but they are interested in eyewitness behaviour and psychology, in people's ability to recall observations, in the transmission and evolution of folklore and cultural images, that kind of stuff. In their recent book, Abominable Science, Daniel Loxton and Donald Prothero recently termed this whole socio-psychological component, they termed this post-cryptid cryptozoology. And I would say for excellent examples of this kind of stuff, look at Charles Paxton's work. Fourthly and finally, the complaint that we sometimes hear, the complaint that skeptics are uninterested, uninformed, that they're uninterested, those claims are clearly incorrect. In fact, you could make the claim that some people who regard themselves as skeptics have contributed more to the progress of cryptozoology than have the so-called true believer type cryptozoologists. And I want to explore this a bit further by telling you about my own involvement in cryptozoological research. Now, as a child, as a young person, I wasted copious amounts of time drawing sea and lake monsters. And I would say that, like many people, my early interest in cryptozoology was driven by the belief that cryptids really were real. I'm sure many people would say this. As a much younger person, I honestly believed that eyewitness accounts that you read in the cryptozoological literature really did describe real encounters with real animals that represented undiscovered species, and species that were often spectacular in form and size, species that were highly significant in terms of what they might tell us about evolution and biodiversity. As a teenager, I struck up correspondences with various cryptozoological authors and publishers, people including Michel Renal, Matt Billy, John Downs, Ben Roche, Carl Schuker, and others, and I began publishing various semi-technical articles, mostly devoted to mystery whale and sea serpent reports. I was 18, 19 years old when I was doing this. The articles appeared in such venues as Animals and Men. Look, I even made the cover, top right there. Also Exotic Zoology, the Cryptozoology Review, Fortean Times. Looking back at those articles now, they're definitely less sceptical than anything that I would write today, but they're not too bad in terms of credulity and logic. Not too bad. In articles that I published in Fortean Times in 2000 and Fortean Studies in 2001, I urged cryptozoologists to give up on the prehistoric survivor paradigm. This is the idea, still really popular within cryptozoology, which basically proposes that cryptids are modern-day descendants of groups that are otherwise known only from the fossil record. Groups like plesiosaurs, mosasaurs, basilosaur whales, pterosaurs. I also said that if we're going to take seriously the idea that some sea monster accounts really do describe encounters with unknown animals, and the great classic realistic sounding sea serpent account is the brilliant Valhalla incident of 1905, if we're going to take seriously, well, if some sea monster accounts really do describe observations of undiscovered species, we don't yet have enough information to classify or identify them. I think that's an important point which is basically ignored by cryptozoologists who think that you can provide a really precise identification for a specific cryptid. Since doing these early things, I mean, today I'm a working scientist, and I've published a number of technical papers in the peer-reviewed literature that have some relevance to cryptozoological hypotheses. So in 2009, Michael Woodley, Hugh Shanahan and myself, we published a paper in which we evaluated the likelihood that new pinnipeds, seals, sea lions and walruses, new pinnipeds might await discovery. We basically concluded that there probably aren't any new pinnipeds awaiting discovery. In 2011, Michael Woodley, myself and Cameron McCormick published an evaluation of Captain Haviland's baby Cadborosaurus. Now this is an alleged baby sea serpent, about 40 centimetres long, captured off the coast of British Columbia, kept overnight in a bucket, but released in the morning out of pity. And we explained in our paper, we did a character analysis, broke down all the features that Haviland described, and we basically concluded that it's almost certainly, this animal was almost certainly a pipefish. Some cryptozoologists who are really big fans of Cadborosaurus were very angry with our paper, and a very interesting exchange developed in the literature, toing and froing. All of this is available online if you Google Cadborosaurus Wars. Very entertaining, interesting series of exchanges. In 2012, I published an evaluation of an Australian mammal carcass found on a beach, intimated by some cryptozoologists to be maybe something to do with the fabled Queensland marsupial tiger. Unfortunately, it turned out to be a drowned house cat. And earlier this year, Max Blake, Ross Barnett, myself and a team of colleagues, we published a study in which we basically used as many different methods as we could to investigate a lynx carcass. This animal had been running around alive, as opposed to running around dead. This animal had been running around in southwestern England, in Devon, in the early 1900s. And I think it's got quite, it's quite important in terms of the whole British big cats phenomenon. So, I'd argue personally that, I've given specific cryptids and cryptozoology in general more than a fair hearing. As a skeptic, I certainly don't discount out of hand the possibility that given mystery creatures might really exist, and obviously, in many ways, I really hope they do exist. But I'd argue that at the moment, there's no compelling evidence to support the existence of the vast majority of mystery animals described in the cryptozoological literature. But despite what I think is a really even-handed treatment of the whole subject of cryptozoology, my skepticism in particular about Bigfoot, the Loch Ness Monster and sea serpents means that I've been labelled an ivory tower scientist, an academic snob, an elitist, and even a coward, because I failed to say nice things about the DNA evidence that some Bigfoot researchers say that they found. And on that note, I often find the attitude of cryptozoologists infuriating. Myself and other skeptics, we're not enemies of cryptozoology, and I'm really tired of hearing that skepticism is a bad thing. If we want critical standards of any kind, skepticism really is needed. It's absolutely a must. At the risk of repeating myself, let me say again that promoting a skeptical approach doesn't mean that you regard cryptozoology as nonsense. It doesn't mean that all ideas about the possible existence of all mystery creatures should be abandoned, dismissed or rubbished. Now, on that note, what indeed are we to make of all the evidence that cryptozoologists have amassed? Now, eyewitness testimony forms by far the bulk of cryptozoological data. Now, you could hold an entire seminar on the topic of eyewitness reliability, on data recall, on the problems associated with perception, with memory, how experiences are relayed to other people. We, of course, certainly can't reject the idea that all eyewitness evidence, has to be rejected out of hand without consideration. But we definitely shouldn't be naive enough to think that eyewitness evidence is reliable or trustworthy, or that eyewitness reports are equally worthy. They definitely are not. And there's an enormous body of literature which basically shows that humans are unreliable eyewitnesses across the board, across every single branch of human experience. Basically, if anyone ever tells you they've ever seen anything, don't believe them. They're almost definitely wrong. That's certainly the impression you get from reading studies on eyewitness reliability. What about other sorts of evidence? As is very well known, this is the stuff that kind of, excites everyone about cryptozoology. There are a number of photos, a number of key bits of film and so on that purport to show cryptids, purport to show mystery creatures. And many of these images are iconic, some are wonderful, none of them of course are uncontroversial. Let's look at some of them. This is the Mansi photo taken in July 1977 by Sandra Mansi. It supposedly depicts Champ, the lake monster of Lake Champlain. Can you see what they did there? Champ. All lake it's tradition in Cryptozoology that all lake monsters have to be given Muppet names. Okay, Champ. Champ. Most people look at this photograph and they think they're seeing the neck and back of a superficially plesiosaur-like creature. I think we're being tricked. I think this is pareidolia because if you look closely at the image, there are dark regions around about the base of the neck part which don't conform to this tidy idea of a creature. I think that we're looking at a big chunk of wood which is rotating over in the water, creating an animal-like, creating a monster-like appearance. Exactly the same idea was proposed independently by Ben Radford in 2004. He presented this series of images showing how a monster-shaped lump of wood could end up looking like a monster. There are a number of other discrepancies, a number of other issues with the photograph that I don't want to spend time talking about those now, but yeah, wood, I think. This is Rilla Martin's brilliant photograph taken in 1964 of the so-called Ozen Cabinet tiger. So we seem to be looking here at some kind of quadrupedal, tall-shouldered, stripy, maybe marsupial type animal. This is Victoria in Australia. Maybe the animal looks something like the thing I've drawn in the middle there. And basically the jury is still out on this one. Nobody really knows what happened. We are never going to know what happened, really. Who's to say whether this is a real animal or not? There are a few suspicious things about the photograph which suggest that it might be a cardboard model. Rilla Martin's interview footage, which is very rare, seen by only a few people, unless you went to one of the Weird Weekend conferences a few years ago. Her body language is slightly suspicious in interview, but we are never going to know. I mean, it's a really interesting photograph. There are a number of good photographs purportedly depicting the Loch Ness Monster, and here are 4 of my favourites. At bottom left we have the so-called Loch Ness Muppet, photographed by Doc Shields in 1977. Doc Shields is a famous psychic entertainer and wizard, and whether you should trust anything he says is, I don't know. Notice, by the way, that the animal is translucent. That's because it's not just Nessie, it's Nessie's ghost. At top left, we have the so-called surgeon's photograph from 1934. The photographer, Robert Wilson, he wasn't a surgeon, he was a gynecologist. But you weren't allowed to say gynecologist in 1934. This photograph almost certainly is a hoax. I mean, you can see for starters that the object in the water is tiny. At bottom right we have, and you've all heard the story about it being a toy submarine with a monster's head stuck on the top. That's familiar stuff these days. At bottom right we have another excellent photograph, Peter O'Connor's brilliant Loch Ness Monster image from 1960. It does have a somewhat plastic baggish character to it, and the whole story behind it is really suspicious. There are a number of discrepancies with the photograph itself. At top right we have one of the 2 flipper photographs belonging to the Academy of Applied Science and Dr. Robert Rhines. And the idea is that these diamond-shaped paddles are, of course, the paddles of a giant unknown animal that lives in Loch Ness, which I believe would be the Loch Ness Monster. In actual fact, I don't know how well known this is, but it deserves to be as widely known as possible. The photographs actually show the mud on the bottom of the loch, but somebody with a paintbrush painted all that dark area around a diamond-like shape. It's basically a dishonest embellishment of mud. There are, of course, various other images supposed to show Loch Ness monsters, but they can all be explained away as hoaxes, embellishments, misinterpretations. Maybe that's because the Loch Ness Monster actually doesn't exist. Finally, here are a number of stills from the famous and also brilliant 1967 Patterson film, or Patterson-Gimlin film, or PG film, whatever you want to call it, filmed at Bluff Creek in California. So we see it would be really cool if I could show the footage, but I'm not going to. we have what's obviously meant to be a female Sasquatch striding alongside a creek. The animal disappears into some trees at far right of frame. And many of you will know that an enormous amount has been written about the Patterson film. And again, as I said with the Ozone Cadmium Tiger, Rilla Martin's photograph, we're never going to know what the real answer is. We're never going to know whether this is real or fake. There are good arguments, I think, on both sides. I mean, I've personally gone on record in recent years as saying that there are a number of really interesting anatomical characteristics that make the footage look especially realistic, and several people who really know what they're talking about have said likewise. However, at the same time, there are a number of features in the footage that really don't look realistic at all, that make it look like a suit. And a number of other people who really know what they're talking about have gone on record and said exactly the same thing. What I think is really important is that in recent years, circumstantial evidence has been building which shows, I think quite convincingly, that Roger Patterson actually did hoax this film. It is indeed a fake. The whole story is really complicated, quite complex. We do provide a summarised version of it in the Cryptozoologicon. But I think it's really important to know that Roger Patterson, he wasn't just some guy walking along in the woods who stumbled across a female Bigfoot. He actually was a specific, Sasquatch Bigfoot researcher. He was trying to film Bigfoot, and he was intimately familiar with an alleged account of supposedly of 1955, reported by a man named William Rowe. Now, this is an illustration of William Rowe's 1955 Sasquatch. The illustration was actually done by William Rowe's daughter, and it has many physical features that are extremely reminiscent of what we see in the Patterson footage. And Roger Patterson produced this illustration at top in 1966, depicting William Rowe's encounter. So Patterson drew that in 1966 and filmed that in 1967. I'm not saying it was aliens, but yeah. Now, I want to finish by bringing us back to speculative zoology. As I said earlier, cryptozoologists have come up with a load of really interesting, very poorly founded bits of speculation, as goes the hypothetical evolution of assorted cryptids. But there are many cases where cryptozoological authors have actually been quite boring and predictable. And we argue in the Cryptozoologicon that they could have done so much better if only they were more inventive. Now, this at top left is the popular cryptozoological interpretation of an alleged Congolese mystery creature called the Mbilu, described in Roy Mackall's 1987 book, A Living Dinosaur, In Search of Makina Mbembe. Roy Mackall is a qualified biochemist who was a member of staff at the University of Chicago. During the 1970s, he became really interested in the Loch Ness Monster and surviving sauropod dinosaurs in the Congo and stuff like that. And he wrote several books on them, and he went on expeditions to look for these creatures. And it was while in the Congo that he learnt of two reports that described a weird water monster that had planks of some kind growing out of his back. And his suggestion, and he elaborates on this in his book, his suggestion is that these descriptions were of modern-day Stegosaurus-like stegosaurs. This is what Stegosaurus looks like, in case you can't remember. Now, this is such a radical idea that it's really difficult to take seriously based on the evidence that we have. Stegosaurs have been alive for probably more than Stegosaurs have been extinct, actually, for more than 100 million years. And the accounts that Mackall collected, they were really vague anyway. They didn't describe objects that sounded at all stegosaur-like. More importantly, if you think of how you're supposed to come to logical conclusions, if you hear reports of an African water monster that has planks on its back, should you immediately leap to the conclusion that, modern-day aquatic Stegosaurus-like stegosaur? Shouldn't Mackall have considered other possibilities? We know that oddly shaped chunks of wood and freak turtles and unusual crocodiles can sometimes take on a kind of, serrated, lumpy-backed appearance. As I've already said, in the Cryptozoologicon, we wanted to play the same game as cryptozoological authors when it comes to gratuitous speculation. If we're going to take stories of a plank-backed Congolese water monster as if they're reliable descriptions of a real animal, why think that it would be an aquatic stegosaur? Couldn't it be interpreted in some other way? You want an aquatic plank-backed Congolese water monster? Well, there are bikers, not people on bikes, but a group of archaic ray-finned fishes currently endemic to Africa. They did previously occur in South America. They have this peculiar series of dorsal finlets. They're quite big. They can get to 1 metre in total length. And during the Cretaceous, there were species that grew to between 3 and 4 metres in length. So, with all of this in mind, conceivably, could we evolve our own giant hypothetical biker? Well, of course we can. Memo produced this brilliant version of a speculative giant biker in the Cryptozoologicon. The animal is named Mobilia mackerli. And I would say that, you know, with all due respect to Professor Roy Mackall, I think we can accuse him of jumping to an extremely unlikely opinion in considering this particular case. This is not to say that giant hypothetical bikers pose a better solution to this particular case any more than do giant aquatic stegosaurs. But the point is that the giant hypothetical biker is no more ridiculous. In fact, it's probably substantially less ridiculous than is an idea that we see being repeated and endorsed in the literature. And we could make exactly the same argument for quite a few of the other imagineered cryptids that we depict, we feature in the Cryptozoologicon. Can we say that cryptozoological literalism is dead? Are we moving into the age of post-cryptid cryptozoology? Has the time come whereby Michel Merger and his colleagues defeated the cryptozoological literalists? And can we say with absolute confidence that the classic superstars of cryptozoology really and definitely don't exist? Well, you know, my personal feeling is that, of course, the answer to all those questions is no. We can't say any of that stuff with absolute confidence. The world is really complicated. But we certainly need less naivety and more rigour when it comes to, in cryptozoology in general. And if people take that message away after reading the Cryptozoologicon, well, that's great. But above all, though, we really hope that people enjoy what we've written. They enjoy the remarkable illustrations in the book. I was going to raise a glass, but it's out of reach. Here's the volume 1, and well, let's hope we feel good enough about the project to carry on and finish volume 2, because, well, yeah. Okay, thank you very much. Thank you.